Now, as Newcastle United gear up for their return to the Champions League following their absence, obviously an incredible scenes to get back with how tight the race was for Premier League. In terms of the top of the Premier League table last season, to get into Champions League, those spots was incredibly, admirable from Eddie Howe's side. They obviously returned a major trophy as well in last season, but they now need to make sure they kick on and make sure they are, sustainable at the top and competitive as well in future seasons. They want to make sure that it's not just a one-off stint again, and they go flying straight back into the new campaign and straight following up there. In terms of their transfer situation, it's obviously a bit of a slower, sort of one of the slower clubs getting players in, but squad depth with them was a bit of an issue in terms of the Champions League season they had prior, due to the injuries and not really knowing who to sort of create that best 11 that's going to really get them results in Europe. And that's obviously a new look Champions League format as well, so it's going to be very interesting. And then they want to stay competitive in the Premier League as well. That's so important for them and their owners and Eddie Howe's vision, taking them forward, and then maybe try and defend their League Cup title as well. So that'd be there's a lot to look forward to. But in terms of transfers, we're going to go to our North East correspondent Dan Wales. Dan, what's your thoughts on Newcastle, where they are ahead of this transfer? Any sort of updates, incomings, outgoings? What's the latest you can tell us from St James's Park?
Well, Charles, in reality, the only tangible piece of news we've had at Newcastle United is the departure of Callum Wilson, who has finally left the club after several seasons on Tyneside, scoring 49 goals in all and overall providing a great contribution to the club in some darker times and some more positive times for Newcastle United. But he leaves with everyone's best wishes from Newcastle United, certainly. Lots of players have been paying tribute to him as he's now come to the end of his contract and not able to reach an agreement over a perhaps new contract, in which Newcastle was suggesting a pay-as-you-play deal, but ultimately Callum Wilson decided not to go for that. And given the fact that in the last season of his time at Newcastle, his body was starting to fail him a little bit. Injuries had taken their toll, and yes, he was fit for a large part of the second half of the season. Ultimately, his pace wasn't there, and his body just wasn't holding up to the strains of Premier League football. But everyone at the club has wished him all the best now he has departed Newcastle United. But that's the only really tangible piece of news that Newcastle have had. We do know that talks are still ongoing for Anthony Elanga between Newcastle and Nottingham Forest, with the two clubs supposedly edging closer to a deal over the Swedish right winger for around £55 million plus some add-ons. That's the latest information that we have, although progress is still slow in terms of getting that to a complete and fully closed deal. So Newcastle perhaps frustrated by that, and I believe that a lot of supporters are as well, but they are edging closer to a deal that would see Newcastle bring in their first right winger since the takeover of October 2021. Of course, James Trafford still remains on the table, the Burnley goalkeeper as well. That supposedly is also edging ever closer. It often seems at the moment that Newcastle are just edging step by step closer to these two deals that are currently on the table. Of course, that won't be it from an incomings perspective for Newcastle once those two, or if those two do come in to the club, because they also would like a centre-half to play alongside Sven Botman and someone to come in to be an eventual Fabian Schär replacement, as well as also perhaps a replacement for Dan Burn if Botman is to also be fully fit this season as well, because of course Schär and Burn, as good as they were last season, they are perhaps coming to the twilight years of their career, and they won't go on forever, so Newcastle need to look ahead to the future as well. And for example, Scalvini from Atalanta has been mentioned an awful lot, whether Newcastle and the Italian side are able to come to a deal over him, that remains to be seen, but he's the one who's currently being played in the press as Newcastle's top centre-half target to play alongside Sven Botman. And so that is really it for the moment from Newcastle's perspective in terms of incomings. It's very much Elanga, Trafford and perhaps Scalvini, although whether that one is as true as the other two still remains to be seen. Perhaps they would like a striker to cover Callum Wilson's departure, I should say now, and give some relief to Alexander Isak, although you'd imagine also that Will Osula would get some of that responsibility. They might also want to do that, though, with some time still left in the transfer window.